sometimes it is worth saying, look, if for a client, again, if they've had difficulties enforcing restrictions, this might be one option for you. Or have you thought about something else? It's worth looking at. And like I say, if the clients are interested, great. And if they're not, great. But they can see you're trying to think outside the box, which I think always goes down well.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com. This episode is sponsored by the University of Law. The University of Law offers a range of undergraduate and postgraduate courses and master's degrees alongside an award-winning pro bono clinic, so you can build up your legal experience while studying. And their experienced career service will enable you to put your best foot forward when launching your legal career. The courses are employment focused and based on real legal practice, so you'll be better prepared for the workplace. Part-time and online study options are available so you can work and study at the same time. Click the link in the description box of the podcast to find out more about the courses on offer. Welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. My name's Camilla. I'm a trainee solicitor and I'm going to be your host for today. In today's episode, we are joined by Natalie Jones, who is a Dubai-based employment partner at DLA Piper. Natalie has been ranked Next Generation Partner in the Legal 500 for the UAE's Employment Category 2024. In today's episode, we're going to be finding out all about Natalie's career journey and finding out what it's like practicing in Dubai. So without further ado, let's welcome Natalie onto the show. Welcome, Natalie. Thank you for joining us.
Not at all. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
And so I've got a lot of questions for you, so let's get straight into them. I wondered if you could start off by providing the listeners a little bit of an overview about your career to date.
Sure, happy to do that. So I probably, unlike a lot of people, took quite a direct route to where I am now. Obviously not from a geographical perspective, but in terms of how I got to where I am, I went through the traditional route. So I studied for the LPC at the College of Law in York, way back when, qualified with a big regional law firm at the time. And I'd also done a summer internship with that same firm. When I qualified, I spent about a year or two in the UK as an employment lawyer and then moved to the UAE. I spent about 8.5 years with the biggest firm in the Middle East, who also has the biggest employment team in the region. So that was a really interesting time in terms of the work that I was able to help with, and also getting to know the region and how things worked out here. So quite interesting, having just moved from the UK and being quite a junior lawyer at that point. And then after that, I moved to PwC Legal to establish their employment team in the region. Again, quite an interesting time because PwC Legal is not a traditional law firm. So it was quite challenging in different ways to how I'd been at my first firm. And lots of interesting projects, very different types of work to what I'd been used to, and very different in terms of how things operated within PwC as a business as well. So again, kept me on my toes and kept me quite interested in what was going on. And after about 3.5 years at PwC, I moved across to DLA Piper. So I've only actually been at DLA Piper now for about 4 months or so, which is still relatively new, so still getting used to everything. But throughout all of the different places that I've been really lucky in terms of the people I've been surrounded by, really incredible lawyers at all of the different firms. And I've also been very, very fortunate in terms of the mentors that I've had in each of the firms and indeed outside of the firm. So I've had a lot of official and unofficial mentors that have provided really good guidance and support along the way. And I think I have to give them credit for where I am at the moment. So if anybody is interested in terms of how to help yourself move forward, mentors, officially and unofficially, are a really good option there, and they've certainly helped me throughout my career.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting to see that you moved to Dubai after, like you said, as a junior lawyer, and then yeah, you've done some really interesting things in Dubai as well. Sorry, in the UAE as well. So, why did you decide to qualify as an employment lawyer?
Well, actually, I always laugh when I get asked this question just because I actually went through my time at university and at law school and in my training contract until my third seat, being absolutely certain that I would be an insolvency or corporate restructuring solicitor, determined, like absolutely determined. That was the only thing I wanted to do. And then in the third seat, I was exposed to employment law and really felt like I found my place there. And now I'm really an employment law geek. I can't imagine doing anything else at all, which, as I say, I laugh about every time I think about it. But I'd say that there are probably three key things that drew me to employment law once I'd got into that seat. So the first one is people. So really a really broad category, but I really think employment law is for a certain type of solicitor. And underneath everything, you have to like people. So obviously people are at the heart of every business. The kind of workforce is at the heart of everything. And that creates a real degree of uncertainty in terms of what we're doing. So if you have 10 employees in the same situation, you will always get 10 different reactions to something new being proposed. And so I think you really have to be interested in what's driving people and how they might react. And we have to think in advance about that. And also, obviously, we are dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. So the client base is quite diverse. We might be dealing with managers on one day, HR on the next, and then general counsel or lawyers the next day. And you've got to be able to deal with every person individually and at their level. So some people will have a lot of experience. They'll be, have the same type of background as you. And so you can tell them things in a different way than you might tell somebody who's brand new to a HR role or who's never done HR before and is in a management role, having to deal with, for example, a disciplinary matter. The other thing is it's a very practical area of law. So our advice really does have to be user friendly. And I know most lawyers now are trying to make sure everything's very practical and commercial, but our advice really does have to be sensible and commercial in the wider context, because most of the times we give clients advice, it's not just what can we do with this employee? It's looking at a bigger picture around what their plans are going forward, how employees are going to react, how the rest of the employee population is going to deal with things. And also, what the company's culture and other considerations, how they play into this as well. So it's really important to remember that we're supporting the business and mitigating risk, but we're not here to hinder commercial plans. So we really have to be quite on top of that. And I think the final thing is constant change. So I really like that we don't know what's going to come onto the desk one day to the next. We could be, advising a government on changes to legislation one day, and then the next we're talking about reducing headcount in a business or increasing headcount or incentives or dealing with a dispute, for example. So there's a lot going on. And of course, above all of that, there's a lot of legislative change, not just in the UAE, although the UAE is constantly changing, I think probably more so than a lot of other jurisdictions, but there's a lot happening. So prime example of that was in COVID. So during the pandemic, obviously everyone had to react quickly, and especially the employment lawyers, because we were then looking at employees being at home and remote working and furlough in the UK and other topics that probably just hadn't been thought about before, or certainly to the same degree. So you really have to be ready to, deal with things as they come in and respond quite quickly, but being commercial throughout. So it's quite an exciting area of law, in my opinion.
It sounds very, very interesting. And I think it's also, it really goes to show that you should keep an open mind, because you went into your training thinking that you were going to qualify as a restructuring and insolvency lawyer, and then surprised yourself when you actually tried something different. So yeah, I think it's really important to keep an open mind. Something similar happened to me. I thought I was going to qualify into corporate, but then tried tax and very unexpectedly enjoyed it. So
gosh, that is surprising, the tax.
I know. But no, employment sounds great, and really varied with that people element and that extra challenge of thinking about the impact of the advice on the person at the other end of the advice, and for all those reasons that you mentioned. So, I mean, I guess we've covered it a little bit, but I wondered if you could maybe provide some detail about what the work of an employment lawyer would typically involve.
Of course, yeah. So it's really broad, and you've probably realised that from my answer to the last question. But obviously, some of the issues are jurisdiction specific. So there are certain issues in some jurisdictions that are not relevant to others. So, for example, in the UK, I was involved in a lot of tribunal work, and I'm just not. We don't have tribunals in the UAE, so the litigation is slightly different. So that will make a difference. But in terms of the work that I've done and that my team is now dealing with, we pretty much cover everything that relates at all to employees. So that might be providing day-to-day advice to companies on employment strategies or management of issues as they arise. So it might be, an employee has been found doing something they shouldn't have been, and then we're advising on discipline or perhaps exit from the business. It might be things like employees that pass away, unfortunately, during service. So what do we do with their remains? What's the company obliged to do with that? And what do they have to do with regard to any entitlements? So accrued but untaken annual leave, notice, any other amounts that are due to the employee. It might be things like incentivizing employees, so long-term incentive plans or employee share option schemes, or drafting employment contracts and policies. There's also a big part of what we do that involves dealing with the employment aspects of corporate transactions. So how to move employees perhaps from one entity to another, or how to deal with individuals where there are duplication of roles pursuant to a corporate transaction. It might even be things like where the government privatizes an entity or there's an IPO. What do we do with employees, and are there any risk areas that our clients need to be aware of? So that's quite an interesting part as well. But we also do some really exciting things like advising the governments on workforce strategy and new legislation. So if there is movement at government level to bring in a new law, they might come to us and say, give us a view on what this law might look like, or what other countries are doing. How can we take the best from other countries, and actually then drafting of the law, what might that look like? And then I guess that the final point is probably defending employment disputes and negotiating settlements. So it's not the same as in the UK, like tribunal heavy. It's more actual litigation in the courts, and we do have to liaise with local lawyers because of the restrictions on access to courts here in the UAE outside of the DIFC and ADGM. So we do have to manage that side of things as well. So we can pretty much be involved in absolutely everything. And we're now starting to see some questions that I haven't really seen before around how will employment look in the metaverse? So what will changes involve, or what changes will be involved there? Will there be anything that employers can do? What aspects will the government be dealing with? Will it be regulated? And obviously, a lot of those questions we just don't know the answer to yet. So it's really interesting trying to think outside the box there and coming up with possible options, and looking also there at opportunities around, can we help with regulation of that, and can we prepare companies for possibly the metaverse increasing in terms of its relevance? So there's a lot to what we do, and I think most other lawyers probably think all that we do is employment contracts and policies, which obviously is a small part of it, but we do a lot more than that. So it keeps us all on our toes.
That does sound very varied and interesting. And so would you say that employment lawyers would generally do sort of transactional advisory and disputes work? Would you say that that's kind of the spread that an employment lawyer would get involved in?
Yeah, I think so. And there's real opportunity to look at where your preference is. So there are lawyers in the teams that I've been in that have a real preference for the contentious side. And so they probably don't do a lot of transactional. They'll stick to, negotiating settlements and mediation and looking at how to deal with, litigation strategies, etc. And there are others who prefer the advisory or the transactional side. So you can really move towards what your preference is. But in the background, you would have an understanding of everything and probably be able to do everything. And that's one of the great things about being in the UAE, that it's not quite as clean cut as you're a contentious lawyer or you're not. You have to be able to do everything, but you can lean more towards one preference if you have it.
Okay. And what you said about the metaverse was fascinating. I think we'll have to invite you back to do a whole episode on the metaverse. But yeah, that does sound really interesting.
We'd need a whole episode for that one because there's so much to cover.
I don't even know what to ask you about the metaverse.
We can think back, it's fine.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about working in Dubai. So I wondered if you could share how and why you began practicing in Dubai in 2011, I think it was.
It was 2011, and I'm a little bit reluctant to say it, but I came to the UAE only because my husband was offered a role in the UAE at that time, and he was very keen to experience working elsewhere. So I was a little bit pulled along. And you probably wouldn't believe that now in terms of how much I love being here and the length of time we've been here. So initially, I wasn't particularly excited about leaving the UK. And the region, and especially the UAE, was a very different place at that time. It's grown a lot since then. But I thought we would be here for a year and then we'd go back to the northeast of England and that would be it. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And the main reason it hasn't happened was because I realized how amazing it is being in the UAE. And obviously there's all the usual things. It's great for families. It's very safe. It's a really lovely, diverse place to be. But the real thing that kept me here and my husband for that matter was that we realized the opportunities really are endless. So there's so much appetite from the government and from the businesses that are here to do more, to look for the next thing. What can we push? Can we do? Can we look at space, for example? Can we look at something that the other countries maybe are not as focused on? Or is there an opportunity that isn't being looked at as much elsewhere? How do we change things and diversify? How do we just do something new? And it's a really great place for you individually in terms of your own opportunities for real growth and constant development. So it's the reason that I moved here isn't the same reason I stayed here, but it's a really great place to be, and especially in my view for lawyers, because there's still so much to do. And the UAE especially is still a really young country when we look at the bigger picture globally, still quite new. There's still a lot being done, a lot of changes on the legislation side of things. So there's always something new going on that keeps things interesting. So that's kind of why I've been here all this time, despite originally thinking I'd be here for 1 year only.
Well, I have to say there are worse places that your husband could have dragged you along to, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
It sounds like an incredible place to live and work. So I can definitely see why you stayed. And so what are the main differences between practicing law in the UK and practicing in Dubai?
There's a lot of differences day to day. There's a lot of things that come up that you think probably things would have been a bit different in the UK, or I would have handled things differently. But the most obvious thing is obviously that the UAE, outside again of ADGM and the DIFC, which are common law free zones, is that the UK is a common law jurisdiction and the UAE is a civil law jurisdiction. So what does that mean in practice? Well, the UK, in my view, is a little bit more predictable in terms of outcomes for disputes and what companies need to do to be compliant. And I think that also extends to changes in terms of, in the UK, we know quite far in advance when there's going to be a change in legislation, not least because usually when we have a new government or there's changes at that side of things, we know there will be legislative changes as well. And then we'll have time to look at white papers and pore over them and come up with views on what they mean and who they're going to impact, exceptions and all of that kind of thing. We don't get that here. So things in the UAE in terms of legislative change happen much more quickly than in the UK. So oftentimes we will find out there's been a change first thing, say on a Monday morning, and no one will have known about it beforehand. And you will know by phone calls from clients saying, we've read this in the newspapers, something has happened, what do we have to do? And at that point, we have to obviously pause and say, let's look at it and we'll come back, which is quite uncomfortable at first when you're used to knowing things well before they happen and being the one to tell your clients what's going on. So that can be quite awkward at first, but then you realize everyone knows what the position is. So it's okay. You end up managing it, but it is quite a stark difference early on. I think it's also true to say that there are opportunities here to try things and approach things a bit differently. So again, the UK is more of a mature legal market and the country itself is obviously more mature. So in most situations, you can go to certain legal resources and find case law on everything. There'll be formed opinion on things. There'll be articles about absolutely everything. So, and of course, there are authorities that like ACAS that specifically deal with certain areas of law and will give guidance to companies about how things should be dealt with and the best practice for dealing with matters. We don't really have that here. So what we can do quite often is if we get an issue from a client, we can take that issue and think really creatively about how can we deal with this? Can we, for example, pick up best practices from other jurisdictions and try and bring them in here? So one example would be in terms of post-termination restrictions. So everybody knows, most people will know post-termination restrictions in terms of non-compete, non-poaching, non-solicitation. And typically there are issues in most jurisdictions around enforcement. How do we get employees to comply with their contractual restrictions? In the UAE, the legislation is quite slim in that area. So it's a good opportunity when companies are coming and talking to you about how do we enforce them to look at things like, have you thought about maybe incentivizing employees to comply rather than just punishing them if they don't? So we could look to, for example, the Scandinavian countries and say, well, in Denmark and other countries, they put in the contract that there is a payment made to the employee for each month that the restriction is in force. Is that something we want to look at? Or do we want to, if we're talking about pensions, do we want to look at some of the other jurisdictions? So Iceland, for example, or Portugal, or some of the others that have good pension systems. Do we want to borrow bits and pieces from what they're doing and incorporate it here? And actually, that also works at government level. So when we're talking to the governments about what to do, they're very open typically to looking around, let's get the best out of everything. So, and again, when that's a bit more difficult in the UK, when there's a lot of very clear legislation and it's been in place for a long time and implemented for a long time. So I think they're the biggest differences I find. And of course, it's just a different, the way the laws are made and the way they are enforced is slightly different. And also you don't have the same access to things. So for example, court judgments are not often publicized. So you wouldn't know whether there's previous case law or not, unless your firm has been involved in it. Typically, that's happening less now than it was before. And so there are some publications coming out, but you just don't have access to the same type of information. So again, when you first come, it's quite jarring, and you're wanting a specific answer, and you want to be able to tell your client definitively, this is the position. And quite often you're not able to do that. So you do have to form an opinion based on what's available and your experience, which is why the longer you're here, the easier it becomes. But it is also just it makes you think a bit more about what could be at the outcome, what the options are and how to deal with it. So it's a different kind of skill that you will have to use here. But again, it's interesting and it keeps us all on our toes, as I've said before. So it's a good thing as well.
That's fascinating. I really like how you can sort of pick the best parts of legal systems and legal practices from other countries and bring them over to the UAE and just create solutions out of the best bits. So I think that's really, really great.
I think our clients appreciate that too. So that, and this is where it comes in. If you have been from different jurisdictions or you have different information and knowledge, you can use it. So again, not all clients would be interested in that. They might just say, tell us what everyone else is doing and we'll follow. And we know that, so we can give that information. But sometimes it is worth saying, look, if, for a client, again, if they've had difficulties enforcing restrictions, this might be one option for you. Or have you thought about something else? And again, because the legislation on this is quite short, and it's not very prescriptive in terms of you must only do this and that, and you can't do anything else. it's worth looking at. And like I say, if the clients are interested, great. And if they're not, great, but they can see you're trying to think outside the box, which I think always goes down well too.
I'd like to take a moment to speak about the University of Law, which is the university I decided to study my LPC at. The University of Law is the sponsor of this podcast and makes it possible for us to continue bringing these episodes to you. So we really appreciate you supporting us by supporting our sponsors. What really sets the University of Law apart from other universities is its belief in training students for the real world from the moment they accept a place. The University of Law's experienced career service and award-winning pro bono clinics offer students the chance to get real-life legal experience which can boost employability. They offer a range of undergraduate and postgraduate legal training and master's degrees designed by qualified experts to help students excel at any stage of their career. Their courses are employment-focused, honing key skills in a teaching environment based on real legal practice. Part-time and online study options are also available on many of their courses to help students work and study at the same time. If you'd like to find out more about the courses on offer, please click the link in the description box of the podcast. And what do you think the main opportunities and challenges are that your clients are experiencing in the UAE?
I think the main opportunities arise from the fact that there's constant change. So there's always something new that they can be doing, or new, that when we're looking at, for example, at the minute, the diversification of the economies, there's a real focus, certainly in the UAE, on knowledge, so the knowledge sectors and professional services, etc., and also having more entrepreneurs and having more technology, so AI, for example. So that for companies in those areas, there's a real opportunity for them to come and do more here. And again, set the scene a little bit. Because if you're in early doors, you can dictate a little bit what things might work and what things might not work, or what can be available in the market. And even again, work with the government to some extent on how to regulate that. So there's that real sense of opportunity in terms of new things being offered. And again, there's more and more companies being set up in the UAE doing new things and old things. So there's a lot of room to learn from one another and to be competitive here, which is really great. There's also a lot of talent here. So the UAE now, and again, this is different from when I first came over, it was a bit of an unknown. And the reaction that I had when I was moving over was a bit different to probably what it would be now. But there is this real movement of talent into the UAE. People like it here. They want to be here because it's a really good place to live, and it's, again, safe and good for families and all of that kind of thing. So there are a lot of people that are happy being here. And it means that companies have a real opportunity to look for and retain the best talent in the markets. So, and from a really diverse background. So we have a really mixed group of people. The population here is very, very mixed, all different nationalities, different backgrounds, different languages spoken. So companies here really have a chance to look for the absolute best in their industry, which is a very fortunate position that they're now finding themselves in. But obviously there are challenges. So it's not all the fact that I've said such lovely things about it. And again, that's what's keeping me here, all the nice things. But there are challenges. So it's, of course, frustrating for international clients on occasion when they don't have previous experience in the region in particular. So they get, they get this great diverse population of employees and individuals that they work with. But obviously that creates its own difficulties in terms of different values and different cultures and expectations. And that has to be really managed quite well by employers, especially, just to make sure that everyone is coming to a common goal despite all the differences in background. And the best companies, of course, are able to do that. They're able to put a common goal in place and common culture in terms of the workplace and get everybody on board with that. I think the other issue sometimes can be that can be quite difficult to locate and understand information and rules and regulations. So again, sometimes we'll find information out in a newspaper, there's going to be a new law, and then we don't get a copy of it immediately. Or there are other rules that are unspoken rules, so we don't necessarily have all the information that we might like to make decisions. So, for example, sometimes there are restrictions around who can get a visa and who can't. So which nationalities can get visas and which can't. And that information isn't always shared openly. You will find that out because you go through the visa process and then the application gets stuck in the system. And you might never find out what the issue is. So obviously that can be frustrating for companies who come from different jurisdictions where they're used to having very easy access to information and being able to escalate if something goes wrong, which is just not always the case here. And again, it's difficult to get information sometimes. And a lot of the law firms, DLA Piper included, are trying to remedy that a bit by putting in place systems that clients have access to that has, here are the laws, here are articles, here is information that you can check across different jurisdictions. So the DLA Piper solution is called Genie. So all of our clients get access to that and they can go in and say, we're interested in the UAE. We want to know about, for example, post-termination restrictions, just because we were just talking about it, or, onboarding individuals or disciplinary processes, and then they can get that information. And a lot of other law firms do the same type of thing. But if they didn't, it can be quite difficult to get information. And I think that can be quite frustrating. And it's difficult for individuals based perhaps here in the UAE who are straddling across, maybe they're managing, head office in the US, say, or the UK or anywhere else, and they have a local office here. And there's a point of contact in the middle trying to manage everyone's expectations and having to let the head office know why they can't get information or why things are maybe a bit slower in terms of getting information than they might be elsewhere. So I think that can be a challenge, and it's been a challenge for some time. So it's probably going to be a challenge for a bit longer at this point.
Yeah, that does sound frustrating. But then, there's a lot of opportunities as well. So I guess it's the same with any jurisdiction, really. You just have to sort of manage the frustrating bits and hope their solutions can be found. So what are your tips for building and maintaining client relationships?
So this is a topic that I really love. I think it's really, really important. And I think the relationships that we build at all levels and in every practice area are what makes the difference between a really good lawyer and one maybe that isn't as successful. So if you invest time into your clients and others, so your colleagues, for example, who can be a source of business for you and vice versa, I think that really does yield results. That said, in terms of actual tips, I think most of them are quite obvious. So the main things are: do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. So if you are not able to do something, be really upfront about that. And in most cases, there's no negative side to you saying, I'm not able to do something that that you would like me doing, or I can do it this way or in this time frame. Most clients are quite receptive to that. So I think you have to be really upfront about what is achievable and what's not, so that there's no surprises. And I think the other thing is also just to be yourself. We're all human. And I think the biggest mistake at junior level is in particular is forgetting sometimes that we're all people. And I've had some of the juniors that I've had throughout my career so far have been sometimes a bit reluctant to show who they actually are. So nobody is going to respond well, in my view. No client especially is going to respond well to someone that they feel isn't being authentic with them. And so if you are just yourself, it's easy to build really meaningful connections, and especially in this jurisdiction, because most people that you meet weren't born in Dubai. They're not UAE nationals. So they know what it was like to come here. And it's a similar thing even in other jurisdictions where maybe everyone's pretty much from that jurisdiction, but everyone's been through the same process. So training contracts or SQE at the moment, people will start getting a feel for, everyone's been through the same thing. Everyone's struggled with the same hardships. So there'll always be common ground. And if you aren't authentic, it's more difficult to find that common ground, and people can feel it that you're not being genuine with them. And the other thing I think is just to stay in touch. So even when, or in fact, especially when nothing is happening on a matter with your client, stay in touch with them. So I think this is especially the case for employment lawyers and probably litigators as well, that, clients generally are getting in touch with me because something's wrong. Not always, but sometimes or quite often they're in touch with me because they've received a court claim, or their employee they've got a problem with their employee and they need to figure out how to deal with it, or they are going through a redundancy process, or something is happening that they are probably not too happy with. And so it's very easy for them to associate speaking to me with bad things, which is not a great feeling. So what I do especially is I stay in touch with my clients all the time. Obviously not every day. We can be too much, but quite often, if I haven't heard from somebody in a while, I'll WhatsApp them or call them or set up a coffee or lunch or something else just to say, how are you getting on? What's happening with you? Haven't heard from you. What's going on? But it's also even smaller things than that. So, for example, and this, by the way, is helped if you know your clients very well. So if you get to know them really well, you know what type of things are important to them or what they'll respond to. So an example of this is I'm quite a big Swiftie. And so when I found out the Movie of the Eras tour was being released, I messaged one of my clients who I also know is a Taylor Swift fan and said to her, did you know that there's going to be this movie coming out? It's going to be in the cinemas. I hear this is the date it's going to be released. And immediately she knows that I'm messaging her because I know she's interested in that. And so you're getting to know people on the level of being a human being rather than, I only get in touch when there's something about employment law to talk about. So it is worth just getting in touch with your clients, getting really to know them and letting them know the genuine you as well. What do you like? What don't you like? Why do you even, for example, why do you like employment law? Why don't you like employment law? Whatever it might be, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But I also think the final thing is that it's worth saying those relationships are not just for your clients. So I said this at the beginning of my response to this question, but sometimes work or introductions or just having great friends comes through your colleagues. And so it's also really important to treat your colleagues in the same way that you would a client. So if they send you something, respond when you say you will. Tell them if you don't know the answer, but you'll find it. Tell them if this is not your area, but you know someone else who can help and introduce them. Just be somebody that people can trust and rely on, and they remember it. So a lot of the clients that I have because I've built up that relationship, but also there are other clients who have been introduced by the ones I have a relationship with because they know I'm somebody who's trustworthy and they're not going to be embarrassed when their contact reaches out to me and I don't respond or I don't do what they're being asked. So yeah, I think those are the main things in terms of building relationships. And obviously that's the starting point for networking too.
Absolutely. I think that's such great advice. And I know it's something that often comes up in interviews and maybe application process for training contracts. And I think it's really interesting to hear it from a partner's perspective. And I really like that you've emphasized about being yourself is so important to connect with people on a human level, and love the Taylor Swift example as well. So thank you so much.
This is what makes the difference as well. So having been someone who is at PwC, I was the training principal for the trainee lawyers. I'm involved also to a different level with the graduates at DLA Piper too. But what I want to see is, who are you? What's it going to be like working with you? I can see what schools you've been to. I can, we get a CV. I can see all of that. Everyone usually who's in front of me is very smart, very capable. They're going to go on to amazing things, every one of them. But I want to know, is it going to be nice to work with you? Are you going to be receptive to training and to learning? Are you eager to be here? And I don't think you can fake that. So this goes well beyond the client and the question. I realize that, but I think it is important probably for the people who will listen to this that we want to know about actual people. What interests you? What could we, for example, we at DLA Piper have an annual golf day. Do you like golf? Could we send you along to that? Would you have a nice time? Or are you someone who would like something else and we could put you in front of a different client who would like something else that you like? But, you have to be yourself. Otherwise, none of that comes through and it ends up that you're not different to anybody else whose wonderful CV we've got. So I think that is really important.
Thank you so much for your insight on that topic. And I wondered if you have any advice for our listeners who may be interested in a career in the Middle East in the future. I'm sure it'll be all of them at this point, but yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. I think the main thing is to think carefully about what you want and why. So a lot of people will have seen Dubai Bling and the other apparently real life TV shows that are recorded here. But it's important to look past that and see what would a life here actually give you, and what is this going towards your future goals. So, for example, if you see your future in the UK as a partner in a law firm, it might not be good for you to come to the UAE, especially early in the career, because you're building a foundation of your career going forward. So it might be worth being more in the UK if that's your trajectory. But if you want to be over here, really understand what it is you want. Because again, there's a lot of people now moving towards the UAE. They want to be here because it's a really attractive place to be, and it's hot and it's nice to be here most of the year apart from the summer when it's just too hot. But what really sets candidates apart, certainly that I've spoken to, is when they can tell me very clearly what it is they want. Why is it DLA in the case of the interviews that I'm doing, but why is it whatever firm? Why is it that firm here in the Middle East, or that company if you're looking at in-house? What do you think you can bring, and what do you think you can gain from being here? So understand and be realistic about what life is like here, because I've said a lot of positive things about it. It's really great fun. It's a lovely place to be. The people are incredible, and the colleagues and everyone in the legal market is amazing. But it's more than that, and it's very hard work. So there's a lot to do, and there are still challenges, as I mentioned. So I think it's really worth getting as much understanding of what it's like here. Reach out to people. So me or others who is maybe in a similar field to you, or similar background to you, or you've got something in common. And a lot of people are very generous with their time here. So if you are wanting to understand something specific, reach out to people and ask them for some time, a virtual coffee, or ask some questions in email, or whatever's easiest. But people will generally tell you what you want to know and be upfront in doing that. And I think the other thing that's also important is not to disregard other experience. So if, for example, you want to come to the UAE, but you're in a really great job that you're enjoying at the minute, maybe in the UK, and you're getting lots of experience, there's no big rush, because any experience that you get in the UK or elsewhere, whether it's in-house or private practice or anything else, is also going to be really good. And a lot of the skills that we learn in whatever job we're in are transferable. So the ability to research, the ability to network and draft advice or draft emails, or all of these things are transferable. So there's really no rush, and there's no downside to doing that. So I quite often, when I speak to junior lawyers in this region or who are just coming over, they're very worried about they don't have legal experience here, and they feel like they don't have maybe as much to add, which is just not the case, particularly where some of them are not law graduates. And so they're worried about that. But some of the best lawyers that I know came to the UAE later, or came to law later. So they've got this real depth of experience elsewhere, and they can use that, especially if it's related to specific sectors, like maybe they're in financial services, or maybe they're in energy doing, working within actual business. Those skills will only enhance anything that you're going to do here, obviously, as long as it's relevant to the area that you're looking at. So if you've been in an energy company for 10 years, that's probably not going to be that useful if you then want to go to a tech company, for example. But it might be, because it's all experience that pushes you further, makes you more confident, etc. So I think just don't disregard other experience, because it might be useful. But yeah, the main thing is to understand what you want and why, and not, don't be unconvincing when you are talking about that, because of course the natural reaction is that everyone's seen Dubai Bling, and that's what they think it's like being a lawyer here, or Suits, or whatever the programs might be. But so really understand what you're doing and why, And if you're genuine about it, people will respond to that. So yeah, there's a lot of people that will share a lot of information. So if anybody needs anything, I and others, I'm sure, are more than happy to share information.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That has been such an interesting 45 minutes or so, learning all about Dubai and finding out that it's not like Dubai bling. So sorry to any of the listeners who might have thought that, but no, that's really interesting. Thank you, Natalie. And yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. It was great to speak to you.
And thank you to all of the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
To hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join The Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com.